The future of birthright citizenship still in the air today. The Supreme Court punting on the issue while also stressing that federal district judges cannot overrule the president on a national level. Thanks for tuning in to Midday. I'm Maria Shilaos. The High Court issued several rulings this morning, ranging from issues dealing with the judiciary, parental rights, and health care. The president reacting positively to the rulings.
This morning, the Supreme Court has delivered a monumental victory for the Constitution, the separation of powers, and the rule of law. This was a big one, wasn't it? This was a big decision. An amazing decision, one that we're very happy about.
Attorney General Pam Bondi echoing the president's reaction while also talking a bit about the limitations now placed on federal district judges.
If there's a birthright citizenship case in Oregon, it will only affect the plaintiff in Oregon, not the entire country. Americans are finally getting what they voted for. No longer will we have rogue judges striking down President Trump's policies across the entire nation. No longer.
Let's now bring in KSL legal analyst and co-host of Inside Sources, Greg SCOTUS, to go more in-depth on the ruling affecting the judiciary and what many were calling the birthright citizenship case. So, Greg, this was the birthright citizenship case, but they didn't rule on the legality of birthright citizenship.
That's right. And I know people have said they punted on the issue or whatever, but they weren't actually asked to address the birthright citizenship issue. The whole question before the court was, to what extent can judges set aside executive orders, and can they make those what they call universal injunction? In other words, the president issues an executive order. A judge in a certain jurisdiction says, wait a minute, this is not constitutional. I'm going to set it aside. How does that affect the rest of the country? And so judges have said, well, we don't want inconsistent decisions, so our ruling is going to be universal. It's going to be for the entire country. And the Supreme Court said today, no, judges can't do that. They can only rule, like you said a minute ago, or I guess what Pam Bondi said a minute ago, which is within their own jurisdiction. So these injunctions that are issued by federal courts only apply to the federal district, the state where they reside.
Mm-hmm. So the Attorney General using the word rogue judges. Talk a little bit about how this changes the power or the extent of the power of judges.
Really not at all, except that they need to stay in their lane, I guess. And that is, if you're a Utah judge and you have a problem with a federal decision, you can issue an injunction or stop the federal decision, but it will only apply to Utah. The problem with it, Maria, is that there's a chance that you'll get different decisions throughout the country, and different judges will say different things. I think some judges said, we're trying to avoid that by having these universal injunctions instead of having 50 different decisions. But the Supreme Court said, no, you can't have what's called a universal nationwide injunction.
In her dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said that the government's rush to limit nationwide injunctions disregards basic principles of equity as well as the long history of injunctive relief granted to non-parties. So this ruling doesn't eliminate injunctions, right? It just limits them.
Yeah, that's true, and I can understand the frustration. I think that the dissent also said, why don't we just address the constitutionality of the birthright citizenship ban? Because it's so patently unconstitutional. Why avoid the issue anyway? Let's just cut to the chase, because that's really the important part here. Was the presidential executive order striking birthright citizenship for certain individuals unconstitutional? That'll be addressed probably at the next session in October. But in the meantime, judges issuing injunctions have to not make them universal for the entire country. And that is a bit of a change from what we've been doing in the past with our federal courts.
Okay, and this doesn't just affect this case, the birthright citizenship case, but it affects all sorts of cases, right?
Right. As it relates to judicial intervention and injunctions on executive orders, yes, it limits what a judge can do to his or her general jurisdiction, and it won't really go much further beyond that.
Does the ruling also mean that only the Supreme Court can check the president's power?
No, judges can still do it, and they will do it, and these injunctions will stay in place. So if a judge says, no, you can't do that in Oregon, then the executive order, the president's order, doesn't apply in Oregon, if that makes sense. What a judge can't do is say, I'm an Oregon judge, and that law doesn't affect Utah. the judge can't make it sort of national and across state lines. Judges have to limit their decisions to the people that they serve.
So, Greg, do you expect this to become more of a new kind of monster in terms of the number of cases now, since people have to sue for relief in their own districts in order to be effective?
Yes, and that goes back to what you said a minute ago, Maria, with the dissent, saying we've kind of opened a Pandora's box here. So it seems that anytime a woman is pregnant with a child that was born to undocumented parents and wants to establish citizenship for that child, they're going to have to file an injunction of the executive order and say, hey, you can't deny citizenship because the 14th Amendment provides it. And we'll have judges all over the country weighing in on whether and to what extent that executive order is the law of the land going forward.
All right. It was a complicated matter. Thanks for giving us your analysis. That is KSL legal analyst and co-host of Inside Sources, Greg SCOTUS. And remember, you can hear Greg give these kinds of legal analyses and much more each weekday from 9 to noon right here on KSL News Radio. Still at large, the future of birthright citizenship. In just 60 seconds, we'll dig into that one more time with an immigration attorney. Stay with us. Throughout the country, there is some confusion now on the status and the future of birthright citizenship as defined in the 14th Amendment. What does today's ruling actually mean for birthright citizenship? I spoke to local immigration attorney Carlos Trujillo to get his thoughts on what he's hearing from his clients. First of all, give me your reaction to what happened today with the Supreme Court.
Well, the main problem that I have with today's decision, it doesn't really clearly address to the community what is actually being decided. And that's why I love the fact that I'm with you today, Maria, because people need to understand that today's ruling has nothing to do with birthright citizenship. Has nothing to do with birthright citizenship. The bottom line case, it was about birthright citizenship, but today's decision is about nationwide injunctions. They just happen to use that case, but it is confusing a lot of the community. We have received a lot of phone calls already of people very concerned about this, but we're trying to kind of set the record straight so that people can actually understand what is happening.
Right. So let's set the record straight. What does this mean for those folks who do have birthright citizenship right now?
So as of right now, if you were in the country illegally and you have a child that was born, they still maintain U.S. citizenship. If you are delivering a baby tomorrow, that baby will still have U.S. citizenship. The only thing that is changing, and we're going to see these rather quick, that I would say that in the next 7 days, you're going to see new lawsuits abiding what the Supreme Court have established today so that they can stop what President Trump is trying to do. So all that they say, the Supreme Court said today is, we don't want to see nationwide injunctions. So if you want an injunction on birthright citizenship, there are ways to do it, and they described it, and I'm pretty sure we're going to see those within a week, and therefore this is not going to be taking place in the next 30 days.
So does that mean that states can all have a different kind of rule when it comes to birthright citizenship? Or I'm confused.
It is something that it makes no sense whatsoever, but this is what they're saying. Either each state is going to have their own lawsuit, okay, which can lead to exactly what you were just mentioned, a whole lot of confusion because different states having different standards. Or they're saying that there could be some nationwide injunctions, but they're going to have to be done under lawsuits that are different, okay? They have to be lawsuits that are under the class action lawsuits to be able to cover nationwide. So a lot of the decision that everybody's hearing today is just a change on procedure. People need to know that what we heard today from the Supreme Court is not about birthright, it's about procedure and how did you go about it when you want to stop a president's executive order or an overreach by Congress. Today's ruling gives you a roadmap. But I'll be honest with you, from the colleagues that I've been able to talk to, this changes almost everything that we knew of as far as federal litigation. This creates a whole new monster that we believe is going to bottleneck things even worse. And to get the check and balances from the court to the other branches of government is going to be even more difficult now.
Do you expect this issue, the birthright citizenship issue, to be back before the Supreme Court?
It will, most definitely, because today's ruling did not touch on anything in regards to its legality, constitutionality, or anything like that. So all that is going to happen now is the Supreme Court said those lawsuits that are against this, the injunction is going to be narrow. If anybody else wants to sue, they need to sue according to our new rules. And then we will probably finally get to the point of, is it constitutional or not? And from my point of view, as a lawyer, it is not constitutional. It is well settled, and it shouldn't go any further. And we should see a decision on that probably on the next term for the Supreme Court.
You mentioned that you're already hearing from clients. What are you hearing from these people?
So the main concern of the community, the messages that we have received is, oh, so my kid will not be a U.S. citizen, or are they taking away the citizenship of my children? Those are the main two questions that we are receiving after this thing came out, and we are trying to address it with news outlets and social media that no, none of that is happening. There has been no change in birthright citizenship today, and we don't see any changes coming even in the near future. So everything is going to continue. Lawsuits against this executive action will increase because they have to abide, these new lawsuits will have to abide under the new instructions of the Supreme Court. But that's it. There's no other changes. That
is immigration attorney Carlos Trujillo. After the break, we'll spend more time on this Supreme Court ruling, digging into the political effects of it all. You are listening to Midday with Maria Shilaos. We are continuing our special coverage of today's Supreme Court rulings. Joining me now is a voice that you are familiar with, political and legal insider Aaron Ryder. Aaron, thanks for being with me.
Maria, it's so fun to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
So are you surprised by any of the Supreme Court rulings today?
You know, not really. Like, when you really think about it, no. I think that particularly about birthright citizenship, you've already been talking about that on the show. Had they been going after the question of birthright citizenship itself, I think that this ruling would be surprising, but they weren't. They were just talking injunctions. And from a legal standpoint, from a constitutional standpoint, I'm not surprised that these are the rulings they came out with.
So what is your take on those?
Yeah, so, if you look at the birthright citizenship case, the way that our courts are designed in the United States, the way the Constitution lays them out, is that courts are supposed to decide the issues before them, and then when conflicts arise between the courts, you move it up a level. And so, you have an issue that someone's facing in Massachusetts. Well, the court in Massachusetts should decide that issue based on the plaintiffs and the defendants who are before them. And if a court in Massachusetts and a court in Utah decides two different things on the same issue, then that's room to take it out to the Supreme Court and say, hey, these two courts are equally important in terms of the Constitution. You need to decide which one is right. So to have a court in one state issuing a nationwide injunction on an issue for everybody I think it's reasonable for the court to say, no, that's beyond the scope of what the judiciary is supposed to do. And that really should be the purview of the Supreme Court of the United States. So, we're going to see a lot more lawsuits come out with this. Issues not settled. The birthright citizenship question itself is probably not going to, Trump's probably not going to win on that. But this gives him some room right now. What's interesting is that this allows him to push his immigration agenda forward in the intervening time. And maybe there are some ramifications that come down the line. Maybe he ultimately loses on this. But it's opening the door for him to kind of go back and say, okay, we're gonna go back and try and do some things. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but it's a narrative thing as much as anything.
Another ruling today from the High Court says that a Texas law requiring adults to prove the age before accessing sexual material and pornography is legal. Now, in Utah, we have a similar law. What effect do you think that ruling will have here in Utah?
I think it just makes Utah's ruling that much stronger, right? This is, again, a kind of similar situation where when you have a court that's looking at a new issue, they'll sometimes look at other courts to see how have other courts decided on this issue in the past. Now you have both Utah and Texas who are making similar rulings on the same kind of issue. That only strengthens the case for the direction that this is headed right now. So I think this is a win. I think this is a win for Utah. I think it's a win for Texas, for, conservatives who are concerned about this. And, and it's the reason why it worked is because it was narrow in scope. They're just asking for age verification. They're not necessarily preventing people from getting to those sites. They're just saying, we want to make sure that you're not a kid, that you're not looking at this inappropriately, and so we're just going to ask you to verify your age. And that narrow tailoring of the law is a lot of the reason why this passed.
So while this does set a precedent, it doesn't actually impact the Utah case, does it?
Not really, unless, like I said, all it does is strengthen what Utah is doing and make the case for Utah's own laws, to be that much more influential.
Any other ruling by the court or opinion that you thought was interesting today?
Those are the two big ones. There are a lot of things that the court's doing right now. I think what's interesting to me is what we'll be watching. We're going to be watching this birthright citizenship issue play out, and we're likely going to see this end up right back before the Supreme Court, because even though the court didn't rule on the birthright citizenship issue today, we're likely going to see lawsuits pop up in multiple places. And depending on how they rule, if there are conflicting rulings, this could end up right back in front of the court as soon as next term.
And you are listening to Midday. I believe we have Aaron Ryder back on the line. And Aaron, I was just asking you how you felt about these rulings today and how it affects the president's political standing.
Yeah, the president needs some wins right now. The big, beautiful bill is struggling. It's likely going to pass, but it's been rough, no question. And he's been in the fray with Iran and decisions there. This is definitely a win for him to say, hey, look, the courts are on our side, and all you activist courts that are coming after us, we're coming right back after you. So from the president's perspective, this is something that he can certainly claim as a win, even if it may be a short-term one.
Aaron, appreciate you calling back. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Aaron Ryder is an attorney and a former host here on KSL News Radio, and thanks so much for chatting with me.